was watching the proceedings on C-SPAN, so I very much thank our witnesses for sharing your harrowing experiences. What we are dealing with, as far as I'm concerned, is a lawless regime, and with agencies that behave in lawless ways. And we all should be motivated by the fierce urgency of now to do something about this lawlessness. There have been over 500 lawsuits filed against this administration's actions to prevent the continuing lawlessness. And so the testimony you provided shows us how critical it is for us to it's really hard to describe how we all felt watching what happened to so many of you, but to really put some parameters, some guardrails around the behavior of ICE and Border Patrol, some common sense kinds of requirements that has to do with not wearing masks, but having body cameras. There are some common sense kinds of behaviors that law enforcement officials all across our country abide by, but apparently not ICE. And so in this, what I would call the fierce urgency of now, we need to put in some immediate parameters to how ICE is operating so that they cannot drag people out of cars, they cannot smash car windows, they cannot beat people up, and yes, of course, they cannot murder people in front of our very eyes. And so my hope and expectation is that the next 2 weeks that there will be these kinds of parameters and guardrails put around ICE behavior, and at the same time, we need to look at some longer-term reforms, such as what's happening in our detention facilities, such as enabling people to sue federal agents, which they cannot, for their lawless behavior. I do have one question for Professor Stockton. When you have a senior aide to the president say to ICE agents, where he says, and I'm talking about Stephen Miller, to quote, "To all ICE officers, you have federal immunity in the conduct of your duties, and anybody who lays a hand on you or tries to stop or obstruct you and is committing a felony," end quote. Now, this is a senior person to President Trump, and this sentiment was agreed to by the Vice President. Professor, when you say things like that, what kind of environment, law enforcement environment, does it create for ICE and Border Patrol agents?
It provides every reason for them to believe, as Mr. Romanici put it, that they will be able to act with impunity, that there is no meaningful oversight, that any attempt or any lip service paid to accountability is purely performative. It creates an extremely dangerous precedent and risks undermining professional culture and cohesion.
I would say that probably all our witnesses agree that this kind of lawless environment was created by the very kind of statements made by senior officials in this regime. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Moving on to our next member, and just as a reminder to the 4-minute rule, please, if possible, Representative Randall.
Thank you so much, Ranking Member Garcia and Ranking Member Blumenthal, for holding this important hearing on the deadly use of violence being inflicted across the country under the pretext of immigration enforcement. I also want to join all of the witnesses. I want to join my colleagues in thanking all of the witnesses for joining us. Many of you, as we have heard today, have experienced ICE's violence and brutality firsthand, and I'm grateful for your courage in testifying today, for reliving your trauma for the benefit of others, to shed light on these abuses. I hope my Republican colleagues, who, as others have pointed out, are not here today, also take the time to read your stories and hear about your experiences, because what is happening across our country is simply indefensible, and it shouldn't be a partisan issue. In fact, it isn't a partisan issue in our communities. Recent polling shows that ICE is underwater. 58% of Americans have an unfavorable view of the agency. That's a 19-point increase since Trump took office. 54% of independents and even 21% of Republicans nationwide support impeaching Secretary Noem. What has become incredibly clear to me, my neighbors, and to a broad majority of our fellow Americans is that we need a fundamental reimagining of what a just and humane immigration system should look like. Shooting people in the streets, tear gassing and pepper spraying protesters, none of this is an accident, and it's not happening in a vacuum. The Trump administration is recruiting unqualified individuals, giving less training to those who are most enthusiastic about joining this fascist, and I'm using air quotes here, police force, and has even proposed giving them bonuses based on how many people they round up each day. They're pouring $100 million into, again, air quotes, wartime recruitment strategy. Who exactly are we at war with? The 5-year-olds who are being kidnapped from their parents? Folks on their way to the doctor? Individuals expressing their First Amendment right to free speech and protest? In my 6 visits to the Northwest Detention Center in my district, I've seen a shocking lack of medical care and detained individuals being subject to inhumane conditions. As you have testified, Ms. Rahman, no timely access to medication, and in our community, no private conversations with doctors when they are taken out of detention for specialty or serious medical care, always with an ICE or GEO agent in the room with them, despite of HIPAA protections that are offered to all of us, including incarcerated individuals on felony charges in Washington state. Detainees not even provided enough clean underwear to wear every day. First, the administration took away healthcare for millions of Americans through H.R. 1 and through letting the ACA tax credits expire. Then they started shooting nurses in the street and physically obstructing and assaulting citizens who are simply trying to get to doctor's appointments. It turns out wartime is accurate, and this fascist regime is engaged in a full-on assault on everyone's right to healthcare, to live and survive in this country. Ms. Rahman, what you were subjected to is appalling. I understand, as you have told us, you are trying to get to a routine doctor's appointment when immigration agents smashed your windows, dragged you out of your car, and detained you. Is that correct?
That is correct. My 39th appointment at that facility.
You told them you needed medical care and that you have a disability, correct?
Many times.
You've spoken out about the dehumanizing practices you were subjected to after you were detained. Can you share again what their response was when you told them about your disability and that you needed medical care?
First, they said too late. Then they just laughed. Then silence.
I'm particularly concerned by the statement you shared that 2 local officials said they didn't want to step on ICE's toes while you were trying to get medical care. Healthcare is a human right, full stop. And what you've shared today with us and what I've heard from individuals at the ICE detention center in my district makes it clear that this administration is doing the absolute most to sow chaos and confusion and avoid providing clear guidance to agents and local health officials about the rights of detained individuals. Every human, immigrant, citizen, criminal or not, deserves access to health care. We must impeach Secretary Noem. And beyond that, we have a lot of work to do to fix our broken immigration system. And part of that is making sure folks can access quality and timely care. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Representative. Next up is Representative Subramanian.
And thank you, Mr. Ranking Member, and thank you to everyone who spoke here today. And thank you to our witnesses. Really, thank you for your courage. Thank you for speaking out. There's a lot of people that don't want you to tell your stories. There's a lot of people who want you to be silent and to be quiet victims of what ICE has done. But you speaking up makes a huge difference. It makes it harder for them to keep doing it when you speak out. And so please continue to speak out, and I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for being here. Because the reality is you are inconvenient to ICE and to this administration. They told us from the very beginning, all they were going to do is go after the worst of the worst. They were only going to go after the criminals, right? And they were going to keep our streets safe. But in the first 10 months of the administration alone, Nearly 75,000 people were swept up in immigration operations with no criminal records at all. And you all are American citizens too. Is that keeping us safe to go after American citizens, to terrorize American citizens, and to terrorize families, rip families apart? And this is not an isolated incident. You all are not the only ones, although your stories are heartbreaking. This is widespread. In my community, we had an American citizen who was a Trump voter himself who had this happen to him. He was detained by ICE agents who were looking for someone else, and they thought he was the right person, so they harassed him and detained him. He was just driving to work on a normal day. And what's interesting, and what I keep seeing over and over again, and what you have shared in your stories, is that there is no accountability. There are no apologies even. There's not even, all there is pointing a finger at you and saying you're a domestic terrorist, right? Because you are inconvenient to them. You are the good guys. You're the ones that were doing the right things, and they were the ones that came after you. And so never forget that, and we should never forget that. And attacking communities and covering it up is everything, it stands for everything that this country should not stand for. And so what I want to see, first I want to see Secretary Noem impeached. I think she needs to go, resign, or get impeached. We need to see a complete overhaul and reform of ICE, but I really want to ask you all, what do you want your leaders to do? And what can we do to both bring the healing that you deserve and need, as well as bring the accountability that we should see when it comes to immigration and ICE? Mr. Romanucci?
Am I on here? Yeah, thank you very much, Representative. I don't think there's any question that without a legislative change, in order for these fine people to be able to seek redress by filing direct lawsuits against law enforcement officers and having a public trial, if the circumstances warrant, where there can be transparency and the truth comes out, we will have failed. We will not have done our job if there is not legislative change, because transparency is truth. And we can't get to it unless these people can have the right to sue federal law enforcement officers in the same way that the estate of George Floyd was able to sue the police officers who murdered him.
Ms. Martinez?
Same. I just want accountability, change. For starters, change.
Ms. Rothman?
I do not believe that violence from law enforcement against communities is a new problem in any way. However, I believe that this moment has provided new lenses for people who may have needed them to engage with a very old problem. It is only the tip of the iceberg, and if we can set precedent that you should be very afraid to hurt someone like this, then maybe we can solve some of that larger problem. Because even someone who was committing a crime should not have been treated the way that we were treated.
Thank you. Ms. Ruscone? Ms. Ruscone?
I believe the three individuals overseeing the immigration process should be held accountable, because it starts with them: Trump, Vance, and Noemi.
Mr. Stott?
Thank you, Representative. I think there's a very long list that I don't have time to fully flesh out, but in a nutshell, professionalism demands accountability, both administrative and legal, and it demands improvement. That is, an agency learns from its mistakes and learns where it can do better. That's a good place to start.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Representative. Next is Representative Ansari.
Thank you, Ranking Member Garcia and Senator Blumenthal, for hosting this very important hearing today and doing something what both House and Senate Republicans refuse to do, which is to hold this administration and in particular ICE accountable. Thank you all, more importantly, for sharing your stories. Like many of my colleagues have expressed, I am in awe of your bravery, and just the horrors that you've had to go through should never happen to any American in this country or any human being in this country, regardless of what their immigration status is. So I am deeply sorry for what happened to you, and I can assure you that I will not rest until everybody from the very top, Kristi Noem, to all the way to the bottom, and these ICE agents who are acting violently and lawlessly must be prosecuted and held accountable for their crimes. This description, what you have put forward and what we've seen across this country, ICE is not law enforcement. They're also not immigration enforcement. They are literally Trump's personal paramilitary force turned against civilians, no different than many authoritarian regimes around the world. My parents fled an authoritarian regime to come to this country, and the tactics are extremely similar. Now, I want to dive into some of the details of Ms. Rahman's testimony. You described that you were violently pulled from your car by DHS agents while trying to drive to a doctor's appointment. Agents had told you to move your car towards other federal agents, an action that, according to the Trump administration, was justification for the lethal force that was used against Renee Good. Were you concerned for your safety if you had followed their directions?
Absolutely. There were people everywhere.
The violence of your detention, per your description, just seems so senseless. Why do you think they acted the way that they did?
Because I think that they are trained towards cruelty. Their tactics do not logically make sense to me as an immigration strategy. That would be things like helping immigrants access jobs and things. It doesn't make sense to me as a public safety strategy either, but it does make a lot of sense as a strategy for teaching the population to be afraid and not speak.
And DHS called you a, quote, agitator and claims that you were arrested for obstruction. Is that how you view yourself?
No, I am a software engineer who was going to a doctor's appointment.
Exactly. Did federal agents treat you with dignity and respect during your detention?
It doesn't seem like they know what that is.
And what do you think the agents meant when they told you that you wouldn't be a problem if you were, quote, normal?
I think the agents believe there is exactly one kind of person who's appropriate for being allowed to live their life in America.
When were
I
you
don't
first...
fit that.
Thank you. When were you first informed of your rights?
I was not informed of my rights.
And were you allowed to speak with a lawyer?
No, I asked many times and they said that would happen later, but I was never actually taken to an interrogation room because there were too many, quote, bodies occupying those rooms, and I blacked out before I was able to ever talk to anyone on the phone.
And did you receive appropriate medical care or disability accommodations while you were detained?
No, I requested them many times and finally thought to ask for a wheelchair, which they didn't know if there were any. Nobody should not know the answer to if there is a wheelchair in the facility. And then when I was put in it, I was taunted, which is strange to me because that did not make their job any easier.
Were you worried that immigration agents might let you die?
100%, because I read books.
Thank you for your testimony. I yield back.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Next up is Representative Bell.
Thank you, Senator Blumenthal, Ranking Member Garcia. Also to our survivors, for your courage, as well as our witnesses as well. My first foray into politics was as a city councilman in a small city called Ferguson. And one thing that I learned as a city councilman is that the relationship with citizens in their city, there was a direct correlation with their relationship with law enforcement. I would have people come up to me about their trash and just be mad. They'd come up to me about a pothole in their street and just be, they're just hot. But as soon as that trash was picked up, as soon as that pothole was filled, they were ready to bake you cookies. A bad interaction with law enforcement doesn't go away so easily, though. And I say all that because as a Ferguson City Councilman, as a later on a municipal court judge, we worked hard to change not only policies, but also the perception of law enforcement in our local communities. We worked hard to get body cameras on every single officer and implementing policies that required those cameras to be on. We worked hard to implement community policing, where police officers weren't just evaluated by how many arrests they made, but how many people they knew in the community, how many conversations they initiated. We worked hard to expand treatment programs for folks struggling with mental health and addiction. And we worked hard to get law enforcement to buy into that. And they did in our community. And so it's like taking one step forward and 2 steps back when we see these masked agents that I talked about earlier in this year running around with weapons, with the color of law enforcement around them, but yet without the training, without the adherence to the policies that actually we've seen start to build that confidence, that trust back in many places around this country. And so it's very frustrating when we look at how much effort we've put in, and then we see Renee Good and Alex Preddy shot less than 2 miles from each other, just 3 weeks apart. 1 step forward and 2 steps back. And Mr. Stoughton, I just want to ask you quickly about the force continuum and dig in a little bit about the use of force and how that is predicated on the amount of force that an officer is faced with. And if you could just talk about that and then the duty to render aid as well.
Thank you for that question, Representative. In very abbreviated terms, officers can, and in the performance of their legitimate duties, may have to use force to overcome actual threats that would undermine the policing goal, whether that's making an apprehension or conducting a search or seizure. The idea of the force continuum is essentially just a way of demonstrating the relationship between the nature and the severity of the threat presented by someone's actions and the nature and severity of the force that the officer gets to use in response. This comes from a 1989 case, Graham v. Connor, which lays out the idea that force must be objectively reasonable, which requires balancing, and the word that we typically use in this context is proportionality. That is
just out of respect for time, you can't use an AK if the threat is a fly swatter. Would that be fair?
Yes, Representative, that's a good analogy.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Representative. Next is Representative Simon. I just want to remind our folks to stick to the 4 minutes because I think our time in the room, in the chamber is also wrapped. And so Representative Simon.
Thank you, Ranking Member, and thank you for leadership for bringing us here today. I think it's important to also lift up the voices for the past 22 years of folks on the ground in communities, human rights attorneys, civil rights organizations who have been clear that across administrations, ICE has been a damaging force in our communities. So what you all have experienced is the ticking up of an unchecked body. I say we listen to women of color, particularly women of color organizers and activists and organizational leaders on the ground who have been citing this rallying call to deaf ears for too long. Today we heard a school teacher talk about being shot 5 times. Sister, thank you. Thank you for being here, the courageousness in your voice and the tears, so much power. I wish that we as legislators had the courage of you all standing here, sitting here with us today. We heard from a disabled woman a disabled woman who was yanked from her car and thrown on the floor and made bloody and incarcerated with other folks who had not been Mirandized. We heard from an expected father who was literally terrorized by ICE agents and lived to tell the story. The betrayal is a betrayal, it's a systemic and systematic betrayal, and we need you to survive. We need you and the rest of the American citizens and the folks who are in a process to gain their citizenship during this moment of tyranny. We need you to survive. I am so thankful. In Minnesota, brothers and sisters, just a couple of weeks ago, many of us went out to a hearing to hear from folks. We were able to go to Mrs. Good's memorial site where good Christian folks were reciting the Lord's Prayer over and over. We heard from a few of those folks that in Minnesota at night, you hear two things. You hear whistles. You hear whistles and you hear screams. The whistles are coming from the thousands of volunteers who have answered the call from their Lord to bear witness. The screams are coming from the children, coming from the mothers and fathers who are being drugged from their homes, from men and women who have sworn to abide by the Constitution. What you all have done here today, and I know it's been a long day, but you are bearing witness. Your words are sacred. Your experiences should hallow the halls of these hallowed halls. Now, Ms. Rahman, your testimony did something to my spirit, as all of your testimonies did. I came to Congress as a disabled woman to consistently humanize our experiences in an abled world. Thank you. You represent millions of people today who have had interactions with law enforcement and were dehumanized. Just one question, but before the question, again, my deep gratitude for you, Ms. Good's family, and all of you all have come here today. But my question, Ms. Rahman, is for folks with disabilities. Now that you become a part of a tribe of folks who have been disrespected and almost murdered by law enforcement, what would you like to lift up? Your testimony was beautiful today, but being a disabled advocate, being an engineer, being a scholarly voice all over the country, as a disabled woman, I'm wondering if you could give us a few more seconds about your experience and what that means for disabled Americans.
Disabled Americans have great worth in this country, and anyone who does not identify as disabled should probably be aware that any one of you can become temporarily or permanently disabled in your life, and you will need the wisdom from folks who have been having this conversation. Thank you very much for your work also.
I appreciate you more than you know. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, Representative. Next is Representative Min.
Thank you, Ranking Member Garcia. Thank you, Senator Blumenthal, for hosting this hearing. And I think it's just very